tragedy struck when Harry Hesketh was in an unmapped cave in North Yorkshire, UK, exploring with two friends. Harry would fall and completely break his femur, or the bone in your upper thigh area, and over the next 17 hours, a grueling rescue operation occurred. This is his story. Our tale begins today in North Yorkshire, a beautiful, lush green landscape filled with agriculture, dry stone walls, and many dales, otherwise known as extensive valleys. The dales are extremely popular for hiking, but underneath the ground are vast and intrinsic cave systems, attracting the best cave explorers across the UK. Specifically in the Dales is Fountains Fell, a small mountain not very high in elevation but was historically used for coal mining and lead smelting. Small various pits and shafts remain, but the area is now mainly used for camping. There are many mapped and unmapped cave systems waiting to be explored by those brave enough. Harry Hesketh was a 74-year-old retired computer programmer who was married and had one daughter from a previous marriage. Harry has loved the outdoors ever since he was a teenager. He would spend his spare time climbing, caving, cycling, and hiking. This would be no different later in life. Many close friends and family claimed that the outdoors was what made Harry most happy. Despite his age, he was in great shape and was very healthy. Being an advanced caver, Harry would go potholing, otherwise known as cave exploring, every week, sometimes even twice a week. Throughout the years, he traveled to various locations like Spain to explore new cave systems. Many of these caves were mapped, but occasionally, Harry wanted a more exciting challenge and would explore unmapped caves. With his knowledge and plethora of experience, there was rarely a cave Harry could not venture into. On June 1st, 2019, Harry, along with two of his close friends who were also advanced cavers, traveled to Fountains Fell to go potholing. The cave, now known as the Curtain's Pot, was unnamed then and had only been discovered by the group a week prior. They were returning due to their curiosity and the desire to explore the unknown. They aimed to map out this new system and establish it as an official cave. The Curtain's Pot is a mix of horizontal and small vertical traverses that require rope equipment and proper techniques. It also has more standard passageways than one typically thinks of when referencing a cave system. These sections are tight and can have various bends in the rock, with only enough space for one person to stand comfortably. There were tiny holes and crevices one can wiggle their way through, but not before getting covered in mud. The Curtain's Pot is not considered a particularly dangerous cave, but it certainly is not beginner-friendly either. Remember, Harry and his friends would also be doing this blind, as there was no map or guide to prepare them for what was to come. But at the end of the day, none of this fazed the men. In fact, they welcomed it, were excited. These were very experienced cavers. Around 11 a.m., Harry and his friends entered the unexplored cave with their headlamps beaming against the walls. They rigged up ropes and pulleys along the way, making slow progress in their exploration. Occasionally, the men would have to squeeze through tight holes, holding their breaths and contorting their bodies to accommodate against the rock. Many of us would see the small jacket openings and instantly say, yeah, no, but not Harry. Fairly quickly, all of them were covered in mud, but they were enjoying themselves. Deeper and deeper into the cave they went. After about 60 minutes had passed since they first entered, the men were right around the halfway mark of the cave. It was at this time that they approached a pitch-black vertical drop. Having years and years of experience, the men thought to themselves, cool, a drop, and began rigging their ropes to descend. They pinned the line against a rock, and once it felt secure enough, Harry grabbed the rope, attached it to his harness, and he carefully swung his leg over the edge and began descending into the dark. The men above watched him patiently, awaiting their turn. There was no fear or consideration that something could go wrong. Harry was handling himself well, and inch by inch, he descended lower and lower. All of a sudden, there was a loud clank. The screw that was hammered inside the rock and holding the rope came out of the stone. Harry fell straight down into the darkness, followed by a loud thud and then a moan. The two cavers at the top of the drop quickly re-established the screws inside the rock. This time, they added extra support for their rigging and quickly descended themselves. They were at the bottom in no time, only to find Harry laying on his back. He had fallen about 6 meters, which is taller than most full-grown male giraffes. Harry's friend had hoped the damage was minimal, but when the cavers attempted to move him, they realized Harry's injuries were worse than anyone could have imagined. Harry had broken his left femur, which is the bone in your upper thigh. It is the heaviest, strongest, and longest human bone in our bodies. The fracture was bad, so bad that it had broken Harry's skin and was protruding out. He was screaming in agony and was in immense pain. Being deep inside the curtain's pot, the cavers realized that there was no way Harry would be making it out without additional assistance. The winding passageways, small holes, and vertical drops that they had all easily traversed now stood in their way to safety. Harry managed to stay conscious through all of this, and being the experienced man, he told his friends to leave the cave and call for help. So that's exactly what they did. It took about 30 minutes, but around 12:30 p.m., a distress call was made for Harry. They ended up reaching the cave rescue organization based in North Yorkshire. Once the call was made, one caver stayed to receive the rescue team and assist them from the outside, while the other companion returned to Harry deep inside the curtain's pot. The team arrived quickly, but once on site, they realized that an impossible task stood before them. Since the cave was unmapped, the rescue team could only rely on the description of each passageway from Harry's friend. It became apparent that major engineering work would be required to assist Harry. Many of the crawling passageways were too narrow to transport Harry through without additional rigging, and they simply did not have the manpower for the amount of work that would be required. The rescue team called for help, and many neighboring organizations answered that call. In total, over 90 individuals were on site helping. They were advanced cavers, cave digging experts, and a trained doctor. The advanced cavers and trained doctor were among the first group to enter the passages. Once inside, they remarked that the cave was a great find, despite the circumstances. After some time, they reached Harry, and immediate first aid was provided. He was responsive and answered questions, but due to the severity of his injury, there was little that could be done deep inside the cave. While this was going on, the rescue teams on the surface began rigging the cave to transport Harry out on a stretcher. This proved to be an extremely hard task and was taking much longer than expected. At the same time, two separate teams of cave diggers chipped their way at the narrow sections of the rock. They used battery drills against the wall, but despite that, it would take over 12 hours in certain areas to make it wide enough. Other teams were tasked with bringing medical supplies to Harry's location, but this also proved more difficult than anticipated. Because some areas were so tight, the cavers had to climb over each other to pass by. Volunteers on the surface provided food and drink to keep everyone's spirits high. Eventually, the doctor, with help, managed to get Harry on a stretcher. However, at this point, Harry was becoming confused and would have small periods where he would go unresponsive. After about an hour of Harry on the stretcher, they got the signal to traverse the first pitch. The cavers attached the stretcher to the heavy rigging system and began the process of moving him out of the cave. They made good progress and all seemed to be going well. The ropes were holding and the stretcher was moving. At the halfway point of the rescue, Harry lost consciousness and was entering cardiac arrest. The team had to place Harry on the ground while the doctor administered CPR for about a minute before Harry was brought back to life. They paused for a few hours to let Harry stabilize so they could plan out their next steps. It was well into the night and it did not seem like Harry was improving. He looked pale in the face and was not responsive to his rescuers. At about 10 p.m., they realized they had no other option than to continue. The cavers attached his stretcher to the rigging system and continued the grueling process of moving him out of the cave. The rescue team moved quickly and it seemed to be going fairly well. Harry was eerily quiet, almost like he was holding on to his last breath. As they were lifting him out of the cave, Harry went into cardiac arrest again. He was so weak that little could be done. Given the location of the stretcher, it was not reasonable to lower him to the ground and administer CPR. The only option was to continue to lift him to the surface. Unfortunately, Harry would die on top of the same pitch from where he fell. Everyone was devastated, as this was a huge blow to the morale. However, the rescuers continued to remove Harry's body from the cave. He would have to be taken off the stretcher multiple times to fit through some of the more narrow passageways. It became clear that the only way Harry could have gotten out of that cave was if he was in a condition where he could help himself. The news of Harry's passing was relayed to the surface. Because this was now a body recovery, they were able to use specialized equipment, packing Harry into an enclosed stretcher. As they moved him through the cave, diggers continued making space up until the point where the stretcher would reach them. At 5 a.m., Harry was finally lifted out of the cave. The entire rescue attempt took over 17.5 hours, with many of the cavers citing it was the most difficult extraction they had ever been a part of. Hundreds of pounds of equipment had been carried in and out of the cave, with some of it breaking along the way. The 90 volunteers involved spent a combined total of 1,626 hours in the rescue attempt. The cause of death was ruled to be hypothermia and hypovolemic shock caused by his left femur fracture. Harry's daughter would come out and thank all of the rescuers for their efforts, as well as state that Harry was a loving man and a true caver till the end. Harry was put to rest 10 days later. Despite his experience and knowledge about caving, the story is a reminder that anyone can become a victim when deep underground. After breaking his leg, it was unlikely that Harry would survive, but he kept fighting until the very end. If the cave had not been so tight, or even if it had been mapped, the outcome may have been different. But it was just not meant to be.